Welcome, Washington, D.C. Metro, to Ryan Sloper's Real Estate Radio, the most important hour of radio every Monday on WHFS 1580 AM. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, Real Estate Radio is a show dedicated to building the Washington, D.C. Metro's housing and credit markets. Within every market, there are solutions as well as tremendous opportunities. You just need some trusted advice. That's my message, and I'll be delivering it to you every Monday from 2 to 3 right here on WHFS 1580 AM. And I want to remind you guys that if you ever have any real estate or credit-related questions, you can call me offline and I will personally assist you. That number is 877-245-2030. That's 877-245-2030. Joining me on our panel today is Louis Cammarosano, General Manager for HomeGain. Louis, you there? Louis, I think we're trying to connect to him. We'll be right there in a second. Anyway, Louis is a general manager for HomeGain. He's also named to Inman News Top 100 Most Influential Real Estate Leaders in 2010 in the technology category. And also joining us later to discuss his experiences with HomeGain and short sales is Mitch Ribak. Louis, are you there? Okay, sorry, I think we got disconnected there for a second. Just before we jump into some of the business insights of last week, I just thought it was pretty interesting. I pulled up this morning. They had I don't know what magazine it was. They did a little run on Bernie Madoff. Did you get to see that? Oh my goodness! You know what? I had a hard time reading it because it was just so funny. I mean, it's he's basically just throwing stones back at the government, basically saying, hey, the government runs a Ponzi scheme, so what's the big deal? But I just thought, how reckless can one guy be? One of those lines. I'm pulling it up right now. It says that the interview was loaded with caveats, claiming that he told investors they were better off investing in government bonds and that he warned them, I could go crazy and do something stupid. I mean, it is just unbelievable. It's just, and, he went on, basically, I guess he has a therapist that basically said that, he's not a sociopath, that, he is, he feels like he, has some remiss about the things that he did. And I'm just like, it's just amazing what's out there these days. But at any rate, it was pretty interesting to read that little article. Before we jump into that, I also wanted to jump into basically mortgage rates. We've had a lot of listeners emailing in about, why so much volatility with interest rates. And with all of the unrest in the Middle East right now, I think that the easiest way I can kind of sum things up for people, especially when you're looking at the oil fiasco that we have going on, is that, typically when the oil prices are rising, we typically see the stock market getting worse. Would you agree, Louis?
Correct.
So, when you have all these oil prices shooting through the roof, it's, people are pulling their money out of stocks and then throwing them back into the safe haven of mortgage bonds. So we've seen over the last couple of weeks actually a pullback in rates where they were headed more towards 5%. We're going back now down to around 4.625%, depending upon your qualifications. And I don't want people to misconstrue what's going on here. This is probably going to be a temporary thing just because there's so much unrest going on in the Middle East and other places as far as the oil supply is concerned. But, this is not going to be something that is the norm. And I highly advise people to don't think, hey, well, maybe I should continue to float. These interest rates are going to go back towards 4%. These rates are not sustainable at the levels that they're at now. However, if we continue to have this unrest, then, we could see a little bit more of a pullback from where we're at now. Business insights of last week. We're going to recap all of the important credit and real estate related events of last week. Now, this segment was brought to you by HomeGain. HomeGain is the place to get started buying or selling a home, finding a realtor, and getting real estate questions answered. You can go to homegain.com today to see what I'm talking about. All you have to do is type in your home address, and you will get an instant free estimate of your home's value online. It's a great way to monitor your home value, and it's free. I highly advise you guys check that out today. It's homegain.com. So there was a ton of stuff happening last week in the market. Obviously, I just touched on the bond prices and mortgage rates dipping back a little bit. On Monday, the market was closed because it was President's Day. And on Tuesday, the Dow was down over 100 points, but the consumer confidence was high, which is a good sign for our economy. And Louis, I think we talk about this all the time. And, when we're speaking about these national numbers, it's so easy to get caught up in them that, in each market, where we're talking about, we'll talk to Mitch later. He's in Florida, but I'm in the D.C. market, and you have these completely different dynamics. And this consumer confidence thing, it can be quite screwy sometimes because people they don't get a good sense of what's going on in their area necessarily. What do you think about the consumer confidence right now and where we're headed?
I think you're absolutely right. It depends on where you are as to where you're headed.
Yeah. The Case-Shiller report showed that home prices were down a bit. And, I don't know. I really feel like if somebody is in the market to buy right now, that it's very important to not focus as much on the home price as it is of the cost of that home. And, I say all the time, I'm not one of these guys that's just out here just saying, hey, everybody buy a house, because that's not the smart thing to do. Buying a house is not for everybody, and for some people it makes sense to rent, and others, that plan on staying in their house for a longer period, extended period of time, it makes sense to buy a house, especially in some of these areas, these high rent districts where rents are higher than what your actual mortgage payment might be. And we're seeing that throughout the country. I've read a lot of reports of, rent prices going up 15, 20% across the board.
Well, you know why rent prices go up in some respects is because as people lose their homes, they have to go move in somewhere. So that cuts down on the supply of rental housing, especially if you're in an area where your kids have to stay in the same school district. There may not be that many homes to rent.
Well, yeah, that's definitely the case here. And, the strategicness of what the banks are doing, how they're releasing these short sales that end up going into foreclosure, a lot of them, those houses are inventory that may not come to market for another year or two. So you're right. Those people ultimately move out and they're looking for another home. I know in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area that there is a tremendous shortage of inventory, whether it's just houses that are trying to be bought by individuals or houses that are trying to be rented out. Either or, there's a significant shortage of supply right now.
And, the market doesn't really take care of it I think for one main reason is that the banks are not equipped to be landlords.
No, not at all.
If they were, then you wouldn't have this kind of third-party need for investors to come in and rent them out.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's happening is you have houses sitting on the market, people living in them not paying anything, and also letting the house kind of go to seed because it's not their house anymore. Whereas if the banks could actually foreclose on them, if they couldn't sell them right away, act as landlords, that would really speed things up, but that's not going to happen.
No, we know that's not going to happen. You're listening to Real Estate Radio. I'm your host, Ryan Sloper, joined by Louis Cammarosano. Louis is the general manager of HomeGain. It's interesting. One of the things that I think, and I know you probably have a comment for this as well, is that there's been a lot of reports in the last week that have showed that NAR, the National Association of REALTORs, has been getting their numbers completely wrong on their housing assessments. Now, I know that NAR has been getting their numbers wrong for a long time, and they tend to skew them however they see fit. And, part of Real Estate Radio, what my show is all about, is bringing you guys the real information on what's going on and to not pay as much of attention to some of these statistics that they're throwing out there. And, it's important that not only that, you're listening to the show, but you line yourself with agents that actually have a good pulse on the market. One of the most critical things I'd say, and I've been running into consumers left and right these days that have not been aligning themselves with the professionals that have been handling, let's say they're buying a short sale. They're not going and finding an agent that has successfully, done 20, 30, 50 of these transactions so they can say, they're a bona fide, specialist and short sales. They're just going out and getting, one of their friends' referrals to some guy that's never even handled one. And that has a lot to do with why these properties aren't moving, Louis.
Well, you're right. You have to have proper representation. Just a quick comment on the National Association of Real Estate Agents is they've made a mistake, in my opinion, by constantly saying that home ownership is a good thing and that the housing market is actually not as bad as it may be.
Right.
Instead of saying the market is good, they should be saying our members are good, and you need to use our members if you're buying a home. But they insist on saying the housing market is good, now's the best time to buy a house, it's not as bad as it seems. They're not really touting the benefits of a real estate agent in the transaction, or realtor in a transaction. And we just did a survey at HomeGain. We asked 1,000 home sellers who tried to sell a home in the past 3 years what their experiences were, whether they used a realtor or whether they tried to sell the home by themselves. And it broke down that you were 50% more likely to get your home sold if you used a realtor. Now, that's the type of information and statistic that shows the value of a realtor that NAR should be promoting, not that the housing market is wonderful and you should go buy a house. It should be, if you're going to buy a house or sell a house, you should use a real estate agent. I think that is something they can gain credibility with, but as you mentioned, if they constantly talk about the numbers and they put whatever spin they have on them, they just lose credibility.
Absolutely, and especially
and it hurts the members. It hurts the members are the ones out there. They know what they're doing. They should their expertise should be touted.
Right, and that, that in itself, I mean, if they would just focus on its members, everything else would kind of fall in place, because real estate is so local and all these markets are completely different. When you're throwing out the numbers all the time, it doesn't give a clear picture of, okay, well, is that the West Coast, the East Coast, the middle, you know what I mean? It could be anywhere.
You should buy a house, no matter where you are, no matter where you live. What they should be saying is, you should go out and get yourself a realtor if you're going to do a real estate transaction.
Absolutely.
And here's why. Here's what they add. You never see a laundry list, and HomeGain has them on our website, what a real estate agent actually does for you.
Right.
You just say you got to buy a house.
Yeah. And I think, well, I mean, in your survey, I'm pulling it up, the HomeGain survey that Louis is referring to also got picked up by the UPI, the Boston Globe, the San Francisco Chronicle, Realtor Mag, Riz Media, Real Trends, and the Virginia Association of Realtors. So this, I think that this is valuable information that's out there, and you can definitely check this out. It's on your blog, correct?
It's on the homepage. It's on the blog. You can access the survey. It highlights that if you're going, and also it mentioned that if you did try to sell the house on your own, would you do that again? And a good percentage said they wouldn't bother, and I think a quarter of the people who went FSBO actually ended up having to use a real estate agent to sell their house.
Right.
It really highlights the value of a local agent who knows the market, who knows how to sell a home, especially in this market where you're dealing with foreclosures, short sales, and all types of perceptions that potential home buyers might have, that you need this type of professional realtor to help you through the process. And the survey just bears it out.
Yeah.
I wish that, I'm happy that Realtor picked it up. And on the Twitter sphere, we had at least 100 of people retweeting the survey results. That's what realtors are about, is their expertise. That's what should be touted, and that's what NAR should be touting.
Interesting. I just thought of something, Louis. You did a survey basically on FSBOs versus using an agent, not using an agent. I'd love to see a survey done of people that were trying to sell their home via short sale. Okay, with an experienced short sale agent versus one that had completed maybe 2 or 3 transactions or less.
Yeah, you're giving somebody on the job training at that point.
Right. I'd love to see what their thoughts of the short sale and actually whether that transaction went through or whether how it turned out, because I think that's so many people's frustration. We have Mitch coming up here in the next couple minutes, who's in the Florida market, who does tons and tons of these short sale deals, so he'll be able to give us some insight there. But go ahead, Louis.
He's learned a lot. I had a conversation over the weekend on all of the pitfalls involved in a short sale, both from the realtor's perspective and from the home seller's perspective, and from the buyer's perception of what a short sale is. Yeah. And so he's created a whole new process for dealing with short sales, and he's become an expert. One of the reasons he might be useful for your listeners in the D.C. metro area is, while you don't have a large number of foreclosures right now, you may in the not too distant future, and your agents would be well advised to learn how to do them, and also buyers should understand what they are. Yeah. Because sometimes when you think you're going to do a short sale as a buyer, you're left hanging, and then you just never get to buy the house, and you wasted 6 months, a year, having your heart set on buying that house, and then the bank doesn't approve it. Yeah, and I'll give up probably in the next 10 minutes or so. I'm going to give a real story of that particular situation from one of the buyers that I've been working with on the finance side for the last 7 months, and what happened to her interest rate over that period of time. But let's finish up from the Business Insight last week. Wednesday, existing home sales came in stronger than expected. I've been reading a lot of articles on that, and I think it's really hard to say. I think there's a big discrepancy. Some people are saying that, it's a lot of first-time home buyers that are coming into the market. I tend to believe that a lot of these deals that are going through are distressed sales. A lot of investors that have a lot of cash out there is what's kind of pumping up these existing home sales. And everything is, it is very local, so it depends on the market. Here in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area, I'm seeing that there, the stuff that is on the market, there is, mainly a lot more regular sales, but outside of that, there's a ton of short sales. There are not as many foreclosures. Now, I know in other states it could be completely different, but sometimes I think that those existing home sales numbers can be skewed as well. On Thursday, they had the initial jobless claims, which were reported,
And the week ending February 19th, the figure for the seasonally adjusted initial claims was 391,000, which is a decrease of 22,000 from the previous week's revised figure of 413,000. So the four-week moving average was 402,000, which is a decrease of 16,500. Now, I know a lot of the politicians have been coming out and saying, we need to get this unemployment number under 400,000 consistently on a constant basis. I don't know. They manipulate these numbers so much for unemployment, and everything is going to be really where you live in the country, because in the D.C. area there's a lot of jobs. We're not hit near as bad. However, I do think that we have a long way to go as far as the unemployment rate is concerned. With oil prices rising, with food prices rising, this is definitely going to put a damper on the economy. And, people need to prepare themselves for this increase. Would you not agree, Louis? I mean, people really need to understand that these oil prices are not stopping where they're at now.
No, I mean, the economy doesn't really look good in the short and near term. And, if you just finally manage to get yourself a job and you're back in the job market, buying a home shouldn't be at the top of your list. Rebuilding your savings should be. And I think just people who are renters right now also need to rebuild their savings, because the last thing you want is to get enticed by low mortgage rates and go out and buy a house and then realize you lose your job or you can't make your payments. So, buying a house, as you and I have talked about many times, should be something that you're financially able to do. You want the house. You're going to live there for a while. Otherwise, you're just a speculator.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're hoping that the home price is going to go up, and that should be left to investors.
Well, we have Mitch Ribak on the line, who's the broker of Tropical Realty of Suntree Incorporated in Florida. Mitch, are you there?
I'm here. How you doing, guys?
We're doing well. I have a question for you. What's the unemployment or what's the job market like there in Florida, just to give us a kind of a different view of the country?
I believe we're right around 12% for the state right now, and I've heard as high as 16% for the county. I'm in Brevard County, which is Cocoa Beach, and the Space Center, which the Space Center is about to get hit with 9,000 people getting laid off right now after the shuttle ends.
Right. So
that's obviously going to do another dampen on our market as we can actually, as we need any more, right?
Right. So you were any improvement that you may have been seeing is going to get worse from here.
Right. Well, it's an unknown. It depends on how close you are to the Space Center too. One of our offices is right in Merritt Island, which is where the Space Center is. So that's going to be a little more, damaging. And there's all sorts of, you don't know who to believe because there's so much data coming out. Some people saying that most of those jobs are going to be retirees and the other ones are being placed. So we've heard a net loss of only 3,000 jobs, but then you hear of 26,000 jobs as ancillary job losses because of those 9,000 losses.
Right, yeah, and then those numbers, they float back and forth. People fall off because they've been on unemployment for so long, and that's why I said it's so hard to really gauge.
Sure.
I mean, really, that's why I just kind of take the approach. I just ask as many people as possible and take what they're saying. What are their fears? How are they feeling? Because that kind of tells you what's really going on.
Sure. And in these days, and I'm sure you know this, and I didn't get the first 15 minutes of your segment there, but it's everything's about consumer confidence, anyways.
Yeah.
I'm always a big believer, and I hear the unemployment is 10%. Well, that means 90% of the people are working.
Right.
Foreclosure at all-time high, they're still only at 5%.
Yeah.
So 95% are paying their mortgages. So, the media likes to make it much worse than it is. And I think if we could turn consumer confidence around, we could pretty quickly turn the economy around.
Yeah, they like to promote negativity. I mean, Mitch, that's part of our show is kind of, breaking down what the national media says and trying to say, hey, it's not all bad out there. Right. I mean, a lot of these numbers, they don't look that great, but really, we're still talking about interest rates sub 5%.
Yep.
And that is where I've tried to focus a lot of my attention to, is just saying, hey, the cost of home ownership is at an all-time high. I mean, you know what I mean? It's more affordable right now.
Sure, absolutely.
So, the people that are in the market and able and willing to buy right now should definitely consider doing that just based upon the cost.
Right. Especially down here. I mean, you guys are in Washington, D.C., I believe.
Yeah.
I was up there training a group. I train real estate companies around the country with internet marketing. And I was up there training a group, and their average sale was $826,000, which is, very laughable to us because our average sale is $106,000.
Right.
It used to be 275, so we're down from 275 to 106 as a county.
Wow.
So you take the consumer confidence, and even when we do sell a house, we make $6.07.
Yep.
So
right.
It's all around negative, but But we still managed to keep our staff here pretty pumped up and happy through our internet marketing, and the people that are out there working in this business are still making a living.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's just keep going through the business insights of last week. The new home sales were reported, new residential sales in January 2011. Sales of new single-family houses in January were seasonally adjusted at a rate of 284,000. According to estimates by the U.S. Census Bureau and the Department of Housing and Urban Development, this was a 12.6% below the revised December rate of 325,000. There's a little bit of building going on here in the D.C. area. I don't think it's as much as I would like to see. Is it completely stale there in Florida? What's going on? You seeing?
Yeah, it's pretty dead. I mean, only 7% of our sales are attributed to new home construction. I'm not sure exactly what the housing start numbers are right now. But I can tell you just from the communities around here that I know about, very few of them are selling any homes. They're happy if they sell one or two homes in a month. Right.
Well, I mean, that's going to let us dive into, I mean, your main focus seems like, I mean, because you do have such a, it seems like a pullback in home prices, that one of the main things, I know I was speaking with Louis, is that you kind of focus on, I mean, you had been for the last year or so, short sales, I'd imagine, correct?
Well, we have no choice.
Right.
They're part of the market. In fact, I was just doing some numbers before I got on the call with you, and right now, I mean, a third of our market is short sales.
Wow.
And that's obviously a lot of homes, almost 1,500 homes are on short sale here, and it poses a whole bunch of problems, both for the seller, the buyer, and the real estate brokerage.
Yeah.
We're all affected by it. I was telling Louis the other day, we have 75 current, actually I think we're up to 80 right now, current contracts for short sale homes, and we know out of that 80, probably only 20 will go through.
It's amazing. And how many of those people would you say that they just get frustrated, that are trying to buy, and then they just decide, hey, I'm not even going to buy, I'm just going to rent? That's
the majority of them. They hear, I always like to say, the media is national, yet the real estate's a local commodity. And so they hear on a large scale media that they can buy a home in Florida for 50 cents on the dollar.
Right.
Well, they are right. We're at 40 cents on the dollar from what we were in 2005. But the reality of prices here are going for, market value, whatever the market value happens to be at this moment, which is an average of $106,000. The buyers, no matter how much you tell them, it's going to take 4 to 6 months before you even hear anything.
Right.
They are calling within a week or two, frustrated we haven't heard anything yet.
Yeah.
We could tell them, we can have them sign forms. It doesn't matter. They still expect it to happen overnight. And the reality is, in our marketplace, 75% don't go through.
Are you seeing any headway at all with these banks that, maybe hiring a little bit more staff to handle the amount that's coming through? Or is it just they just really don't care? Or I know a lot of with the banking laws and stuff like that, a lot of what's going on has to do with that because of the way they have to take write-downs and, the excess reserves that they have to carry when they do write down these foreclosures.
Sure.
So, it is strategic from that standpoint. But, I mean, it just still does not – it boggles my mind that they can't wrap their arms around – you're saving yourself how much money by letting that house go through with a short sale versus taking it to foreclosure.
Right. Yeah, and there is a substantial savings from what I understand when they do go through short sale versus a foreclosure. Foreclosures are great. I never thought I'd say that I love foreclosures.
Right.
But they're a piece of cake, and they still close in 30 to 45 days, and they're pretty easy to do. I would love to see the bank hire more people. I don't think that's going to happen. We're finding, well, to give you an example, I have a title company next door to me that handles short sales for us and a ton of other companies. They probably have 400 or 500 going at any time.
Right.
And the way he's explained to me, it takes a month before the contract even gets assigned to a negotiator. And then it may be another month before they even call you back. So we're 2 months into it before you even get a phone call from the bank. And if you do not answer the phone when they call, you go to the bottom of the list.
Wow.
So I picture these three guys in a room sitting there with stacks 2 or 3 feet high of short sales that they're going through. Call the realtor, didn't get a hold of him, click next, and then put them down at the bottom and start over again. So, that's basically the way it's happening right now. It's just it's such a mundane process. They were trying to force, I don't know, it was probably a year and a half ago now, where they had the answer within 10 days, and that worked for about a week.
Wow.
Then it was over.
Well, we're coming up on a break. When we come back, we're going to jump into a real-time, real story of a short sale and more from Mitch and Louis when we come back. You're listening to Real Estate Radio.